Hello folks, here we are again today, and we are going through our Torah portion, which is Shemini, and this portion is from Leviticus chapters 9 through 11, and we had some technical difficulties last evening with the fellowship, so I wanted to redo this to make it usable, because it certainly wasn't. So it's just me, and I'm going to kind of walk you through my slides here. Now the portion is Shemini, and that means on the 8th day, and so we are dealing with the Torah portion in Leviticus, and we know that the book of Leviticus is all about holiness. And we have a quote here from Rabbi Nassan Sherman from his Vayikra commentary, volume 2, in which he says, the Torah uses the term holiness specifically with regard to 3 areas: idolatry, sexual immorality, and forbidden foods. One who curbs himself from forbidden activities in those areas is on the way to holiness, but one who indulges in those vices is tameh, that is, contaminated. Now, I know that those of you who are familiar with the Hebrew roots, and especially an interpretation of New Testament scriptures from a Hebrew roots perspective, will recognize that this rabbi is quoting, or not quoting, he is expressing his opinion regarding 3 areas of holiness that everybody needs. And these are the exact same 3 areas that Yeshua's brother James presented to the Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. So it's not a coincidence. The holiness codes outlined in Leviticus are well known to Judaism, and especially first century Judaism, with Gentiles coming into the faith and needing to learn about personal holiness would need to start here, because this is the beginning point. And so Leviticus teaches us all about this. And this Torah portion that we are dealing with this evening or today is especially dealing with forbidden foods and somewhat dealing with idolatry, but not sexual immorality. That comes in a different part of Leviticus. And so, just with that in mind, let's get a start on this thing. Now, this is, as I said, Parshat Shemini, and here's where we will start right here. Now, the story thus far, I want to point out to you, just to kind of get a running head start here. Number 1 is that in the book of Exodus, starting in about chapter 25 onward, we get God's instructions to collect tabernacle construction materials. So he's got a plan, and he knows the materials that he needs in order to fulfill his plan, and he goes and says to Moses, tell the people to make a contribution, whoever's heart moves him, it's a voluntary offering, of these items. These are the items that we're going to need. So they do, and they come up with more than enough stuff that they need to build the tabernacle. And so then he gives Moshe detailed plans for the construction of the whole tabernacle complex and every one of the implements that will be needed to build it. And then he gives detailed instructions and plans for what is going to happen in it, the service that is going to happen inside the tabernacle. All of the rituals, all of the sacrifices, all of the procedures that will need to be followed in order to conduct the service in the tabernacle. And then he gives detailed plans for the sanctification of the priests. And this theme of sanctification, holiness, which sanctification is just another word for holiness, or the process of becoming holy, frankly, or better yet, the process of maintaining holiness, because only God can make something holy or declare something to be holy. And he has declared holy his people and those who follow his instructions and who attach themselves to him as his people. He will make you holy. But it is your job to maintain your holiness. And you can only screw it up, so to speak, by defiling yourself in several different ways. But you cannot make yourself holy. You can only destroy the holiness that God gives you and provides for you, whether through the Torah of Moshe and his instructions or through the word of the Messiah Yeshua making you pure. You can defile yourself. So he gives detailed plans for the sanctification of the priests so that they can begin the service in the tabernacle. And what I just wanted to show you a principle that emerges before we even get to the Torah portion, that God has very detailed plans. He has very detailed plans for everything. He knows exactly what he's doing and the order in which it needs to be done. The building now is complete. All of the implements, the laver, the altar, the incense altar, the menorah, the Ark of the Covenant, all of the coverings, everything is done. It's ready to go. But we just need to sanctify the priests. And once the priests are sanctified, this is what's going to happen next. But the principle that I see demonstrated here is that God always counts the cost, understands what he's doing before he executes a plan. He is not, as they say, building the wings on the way down the cliff. He does not come up with an idea and give some tentative instructions and say, okay, let's try this. God always counts the cost before executing a plan. He does not say, let's start this thing and see how it goes, and if any adjustments are needed, we'll make adjustments. So he does not build the wings on the way down the cliff, so to speak. He is very precise in the instructions. He knows exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to work, and he moves forward with a perfect plan in mind every single time. And that is a critical thing to understand about God, and it should infect our lives as well as we seek to imitate what our God does and what our Messiah Yeshua does as a prime example of God, God in the flesh, so to speak. So, number one, God never changes. He doesn't modify his plans. The new covenant was not an afterthought. It was not a rejection of a previous plan, a ditching of a previous plan that wasn't working, an implementation of a new one. God does not do that. He knows exactly what he's doing and the order in which it's going to be done and exactly how it's going to unfold, and he does it like that. And to the extent that we are able, we really need to try to emulate his example both temporally and spiritually. Count the cost, understand what we're planning to do, use wisdom if you plan to do something. And this is especially true in big plans in your life, and also not, you don't need to take counsel from people and pray regarding which pant leg to put on first, but in anything in your life that you plan to execute, that you make a plan and you plan to execute that plan, you need to be careful. And I'm thinking of Luke chapter 14, where if anybody makes a plan and he discovers that he doesn't have enough money or materials or manpower to complete his plan, you'll be ridiculed. Some people will say, "What a fool! He didn't really pay attention. He didn't count the cost." So we need to be a good example of God in that regard. In our plans for our work, for our families, don't make plans on the way down the cliff. Don't build your wings on the way down the cliff. Try to think clearly. Try to get good wisdom from people that you know who have wisdom, people who are older than you, more experienced than you, who can see things from a different perspective than you can, and take good counsel, make a plan, make a detailed plan, and then execute that plan a little bit at a time until you achieve that plan. This is a godly characteristic, and it needs to characterize his people. And I think what we need to do in the spiritual realm is understand that we are trying to always be moving upward and forward. And that means correcting inappropriate behavior. That means learning to sanctify and keep ourselves sanctified and undefiled from the things that would defile us, and making a plan to do so. A plan that is small enough to be implemented in small changes and not so overwhelming that you as a human can look at your goal, at your end goal, and say, I could never achieve that. Because you don't want to be overwhelmed by the goals that you set. You'll never achieve anything if you set goals that are too large for yourself. But having an end goal in mind is what you need, but you need intermediate goals, steps along the way, watershed moments where you can make a little bit of progress and see the progress and move forward. And I think that spiritually, in our own lives, we should do that. Overcome one challenge at a time and move toward the goal. And in your sharing of the gospel and of spiritual teachings with others, you should be letting people know in no uncertain terms that being a minister of the new covenant, being a priest, so to speak, if you're going to try to be a priest to others, if you're going to bring others on board as disciples, they need to have a clear understanding of what is the cost of discipleship. It will cost you your life. Not necessarily physically, although that could be the case, but most especially setting aside your desires in favor of the desires of God and of others, making yourself a living sacrifice, that your will needs to be set aside and your flesh needs to die. When you share the gospel and spiritual guidance and help and leadership to others, it needs to be presented in such a way. And you can't tell them that things are going to be easy and simple. And this is because this is not. It's very complex and it takes a long time. It'll take your whole life, and it's a serious business. So I would just say that regarding what I see as a big picture look at the forest, so to speak, leading up to this Torah portion. And now I will go forward just a little bit. Now what happens here is that once the priests are sanctified and that they are ready to go, they make the offerings prescribed for to start the service. And after all that was built and the construction accomplished and the sanctification rituals completed, Aaron offers the first offerings, and something amazing happens. At the very end of chapter 9, it says in Leviticus 9:22, Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after making the sin offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings. And Moshe and Aharon went into the tent of meeting, and when they came out and blessed the people, the glory of Yehovah appeared to all the people. Then fire came out from before Yehovah and consumed the burnt offering and the portions of fat on the altar, and when all the people saw it, they shouted and fell on their faces. Now, I don't know exactly what these people saw. They saw fire come out of somewhere. From where, we don't know. The rabbis have interpreted this in various ways, that maybe fire came out from behind the curtain, the parachet over the ark, shot through the covering, shot through the veil without burning it. Lit the golden altar of incense on the way out the door, lit the menorah with holy fire on the way out the door, flew over the bronze laver, and completely consumed in a magnificent fashion everything that was burning with human fire on the bronze altar out in the courtyard, and then shot up into the sky or something. It's certainly a vivid picture. They saw something. They saw the glory of Yehovah, and they also saw the fire come out. Now, what's fascinating is, you know that in previous portions, God has promised to Moses that the people will see his glory. When Moses said at the the previous passage after the incident of the golden calf, when Moses, we learned about this just last week, when Moses interceded on behalf of the people and God demonstrated his glory to him and said, I will show the people great, they're going to see something amazing. That is certainly prophetic of things in the future, but I think in the immediate future, this is probably what was referenced. Because there was nothing in between that Torah portion, or that special reading of Chol HaMoed from our last study in Exodus 33 and 34, until now in Leviticus chapter 9, nothing of great significance as far as seeing the glory of God has occurred. And so I think that this incident here is initially what God was referencing. And they saw something that certainly influenced them. They shouted out and they fell on their faces. They were awed by what they saw. And this is something similar happens in the books of Kings and Chronicles when Solomon had built his temple structure on Mount Moriah and followed the same procedures, exactly the same procedures, where they built everything and then they took a period of 7 days of offerings and different things that the priests needed to do in order to sanctify themselves and prepare themselves for the day that the offerings would start. And then when it happened, something very similar happened. And that's a spectacular thing. They saw something very amazing. Now, one thing that you'll notice here is that right at the beginning of Leviticus 9:22, it says that Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. And the rabbi said something kind of funny. I don't think they meant it to be funny, but they were like, well, they wondered, why did Aaron lift up his hands toward the people and bless them and then step down off of the altar, they presume, the platform where the altar was, and go into the tent of offering, the tent of meeting with Moses, and then come out and bless them again? Is that what happened? Or is this just making a broad statement, but then going back a little bit and telling you how it happened? I don't know, but they supposed in a fanciful way that Moses and Aaron went inside the tent and was like saying to each other, "What happened? There's nothing happened. We did this and it didn't really work." And then I guess Moses had an inspiration to come up with the words of the Aaronic priestly blessing, and then that he came out and said those words, and then the fire came down from God. I don't know. That's certainly funny. It's kind of interesting. It could have happened that way. You never know. But that brings me to my next point, which is the Aaronic blessing. Now, it says that Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed the people. And it is supposed that the words that he actually said are the ones that appear in Numbers chapter 6, verse 24, where he is given the actual words of what they call the Aaronic blessing. And I have no reason to doubt that is what was said here. And I love these words, and I know you do too. And it's very comforting words, where it says, "Yehovah bless you and keep you," or guard you. "Yehovah make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yehovah lift up his countenance on you and give you peace." Those are great and encouraging words. So I don't know what happened here, but I do know this. The system works. This was like flicking on the switch, and this whole temple complex compound became a living thing. The presence of God showed up in a big way, and it's quite fascinating. I can only imagine what these people saw, but they saw something inspiring for sure. Now, I want to point out to you that there's something quite interesting here about overcoming past failures when you step in it, so to speak. Remember that Aaron had taken a golden calf and created a golden calf and had the people worshipped it. And that was a huge failure. And what you see in this passage here, I'm going to bring this up on the screen for you. In 9 verse 2, it says, "And he said to Aaron, take for yourself a bull calf." You know, that's what's interesting is this word here that Aaron is supposed to take to offer for himself on the first day. And egel, you can see there that that's the Hebrew word 5695, which is egel. And that literally is a young bull, a bull calf. But what's interesting is you know that in the rule of first mention, you learn some very interesting things. This word egel is first used in Exodus 32:4 for the molten golden calf that they made. And this word egel is only used 35 times in the entire Tanakh, in the Hebrew scriptures, and in almost all of them, most of them, are references to the golden calf. And this specific animal that is referenced here in verse 2 is a bull calf. But this is, in all of the instructions given for what is to be offered on the altar out front, this word is never used. This seems to be a peculiar and singular incident that happened on the 8th day, on the first day of the beginning of the cycle of offerings, and that it is supposed, and I see no reason to think that it's not correct, the rabbis have suggested that this was Aaron being shown loving kindness and forgiveness and an opportunity to make amends. That God said, Aaron, I want you to offer a bull calf. And Aaron probably felt his lump in his throat and his chest caved in. And he said, oh my goodness, I made a bull calf out of gold last time, and it was a miserable failure, and people died. And he probably was terrified. But I think this was an opportunity for God to say to Aaron and to show Aaron, we're going to do it right this time. And the way that you floundered and had failed in the past, I'm going to give you a way to do it right this time. I'm going to give you grace and mercy and show you that I accept your offering. If you do what I say, I accept your offering. You cannot do things the way you want to do them. You can only do them the way I want you to do them. And that's going to become very, very important here in the next chapter. So, overcoming past failures, that's something that we can learn from that. God can take your past failures and mold them into something that you can be an overcomer by. You can overcome past failures, and God can use them in your life. So don't be afraid of them. Be mindful of how you have failed in the past, but look for opportunities that God might present to you to overcome past failures that seem like they might fail miserably this time. But if following God's commands and instructions carefully, could be a wonderful opportunity to overcome something that you had failed in the past. So I think this is a good example of that. Now, moving forward to chapter 10, I want to read chapter 10 for you because it's a critical component. The whole chapter, very, very interesting and powerful stuff going on here. So let's read this together. Leviticus chapter 10 starts out by saying, Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before YHVH, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of YHVH and consumed them, and they died before YHVH. Then Moshe said to Aharon, It is what Yehovah spoke, saying, by those who come near me I will be treated as holy, and before all the people I will be honored. So Aaron therefore kept silent. Moshe called also to Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and said to them, come forward and carry your relatives away from the tent of the sanctuary to the outside of the camp. So they came forward and carried them still in their tunics to the outside of the camp, as Moses had said. Then Moshe said to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Ithamar, do not uncover your heads, nor tear your clothes, so that you will not die, and that he will not become wrathful against all the congregation. But your kinsmen, the whole house of Israel, shall bewail the burning which Yehovah has brought about. You shall not even go out from the doorway of the tent of meeting, or you will die. For Yehovah's anointing oil is upon you. So they did according to the word of Moshe. And Yehovah then spoke to Aaron, saying, do not drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons with you, when you come into the tent of meeting, so that you will not die. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations, and so as to make a distinction between the holy and the profane, and between the unclean and the clean, and so as to teach the sons of Israel all the statutes which Yehovah has spoken to them through Moshe. Then Moses spoke to Aaron and to his surviving sons Eleazar and Ithamar, saying, take the grain offering that is left over from Yehovah's offerings by fire, and eat it unleavened beside the altar, for it is most holy. You shall eat it, moreover, in a holy place, because it is your due, and your sons' due, out of Yehovah's offerings by fire. For thus I have been commanded. The breast of the wave offering, however, and the thigh of the offering you may eat in a clean place, you and your sons and your daughters with you, for they have been given as your due, and your sons' due, out of the sacrifices of the peace offerings of the sons of Israel. The thigh offered by lifting up, and the breast offered by waving, they shall bring along with the offerings by fire of the portions of fat, to present as a wave offering before Yehovah. So it shall be a thing perpetually due to you and your sons with you, just as Yehovah has commanded. But Moshe searched carefully for the goat of the sin offering, and behold, it had been burned up. So he was angry with Aaron's surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, saying, why did you not eat the sin offering at the holy place? For it is most holy, and he gave it to you to bear away the guilt of the congregation, to make atonement for them before Yehovah. Behold, since its blood had not been brought inside into the sanctuary, you should certainly have eaten it in the sanctuary, just as I commanded. But Aaron spoke to Moses, saying, behold, this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offering before Yehovah. Now this next phrase is very difficult to translate. This translation says, when things like these happened to me. I think a better translation might be, because this has happened to me, if I had eaten a sin offering today, would it have been good in the sight of Yehovah? And when Moses heard that, it seemed good in his sight. So, we have some very interesting things happening here. This is highly instructive in so many ways. Number one, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, did something wrong. It is not entirely clear what it is that they did that was wrong. It says in Leviticus 1:2 that they brought zerah, unauthorized fire. Now you might be thinking, and people were last night, well, that sounds remarkably similar to the word zerah, which is seed. And I believe that is not actually the same word. Similar, but not the same. Now, what's interesting is, what exactly did they do wrong? As I said, it's not certain, but what this word zerah is strange, as in strange fire. They brought, that word can mean profane, unauthorized, not permitted. So what is it? Well, there's a couple of things. Number one, there are very specific ways in which fire on that golden altar of incense is supposed to be lit. It has to be lit from fire that is brought from the bronze altar of sacrifice out in the courtyard. It doesn't say that they did that. It could also be that they used strange incense. What's interesting is that the first use of this word zerah occurs in Exodus 30, verse 9, where it says, "You shall not offer any strange incense." Now, all instances of this word zerah, there are only 8 of them in the Tanakh, are usually reserved for stranger, strange, or in most cases, strange woman, adulteress, prostitute kind of thing. So it is possible that they brought some strange mixture of incense. It's also possible that they were drunk because of what was said to Aaron. In just a moment, we'll discuss that. But I think primarily that the problem here is they did not actually do what God had instructed them. They did not. They innovated. They took their own censers, placed their own incense on them, and burned them before Yehovah in their own way. What is known is that they were destroyed. And the exact reason, I'm going to back up here so that you can see this. The exact reason is presented in verse 3, where Moses said, "This is what Yehovah told you, saying, to those who come near to me, I will be treated as holy." That's the reason that these 2 guys were burnt and destroyed. So, what does this teach us? This teaches us that you cannot innovate in your worship of God. There is no innovation allowed. He gives very specific instructions on how to worship Him, and you're not allowed to make up rules as you go. That's a very tough thing for all of us, for both Jews and Christians, and anybody who wants to worship God. Number one, because the system of worship that is presented in the Torah with the tabernacle or the temple and the Levitical system and the sacrifices has been gone off of the planet for almost 2,000 years. So, you have a gaping hole where worship used to be. And each group, the Christians and the Jews, have interpreted what should be done to overcome this challenge. Now that the temple is gone, how do we worship God? Well, the Jews said, they used some allegorical language to say, well, King David says that our prayers are like incense, and you have desired repentance more than sacrifice. And so they instituted a system of a spiritualized system of what they felt were legitimate ways to worship God without a temple and without offerings. Are those legitimate? I think so, sure. Yeshua said that the time is coming, to the woman at the well in John chapter 4, the time is coming when the Father is seeking those who will worship in spirit and truth, and you're not going to worship in Jerusalem. In spirit and in truth. A 2-part thing there. It's going to become a spiritual concept instead of a physical concept at a tabernacle or a temple, and it needs to be done according to truth. So, when the Jews instituted their form of worship, which is basically a Jewish worship service, is where they get together in the synagogue and read the Psalms of David, a lot of it, some of it they made up themselves, just extolling the virtues of God. They have someone who sings, and then the congregation will occasionally repeat back to him, kind of like a recitation, where they basically just pray. And we have talked about Jewish prayer on many occasions before, where they don't necessarily get together and ask for things from God. Now, that's not to say that Jews don't ask things from God. They certainly do. But the bulk and the majority of their prayers are conducted in a way as to say to God, these are the things that our ancestors have written about you and that you have spoken about yourself that show how awesome and magnificent and glorious and loving, how much loving kindness you have and how merciful you are and the great things that you have done. They spend time just singing these words of, one person sings and the others do not, singing these glorious praises of God. Now, I would say Christians did something similar, only everyone in the audience was involved a lot more, and that everyone was singing these songs of praise to God. Now, is that worship? It depends upon the attitude. I have been to worship, what people would call worship services, where it didn't seem very worshipful at all. It seemed more like a rock concert. But then I have been in certain situations where there was worship and it seemed especially worshipful. I don't know, but I think a lot of times Christians get the concepts mixed up of praise and worship. The two do seem to cross over somewhat, though. And I think who's right in this regard? It's hard to say. They're both very similar. But a worship in this day and age is done in spirit and in truth, by extolling the virtues of God, or the Messiah Yeshua. And I think this is entirely valid. But you cannot innovate and do things in a way that seems right to you. It's a tricky deal. It's a tricky deal for sure. Now I want to bring your attention to Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8, where it says, "And Yehovah spoke to Aharon and said, you shall not drink, wine or strong drink when you go into the sanctuary." You realize, of course, maybe you don't, but you should, and I will tell you that this is the first time in the Torah that God has spoken directly to Aaron. You might think, well, that sounds strange. Indeed, I thought so as well. Surely he'd spoken to Aaron before now, but it doesn't ever say that he did. It says that Moses was giving information to Aaron. This is the first time that God himself speaks directly to Aaron. And the first words that God ever spoke to Aaron is, "Don't get drunk when you come into my place." That's challenging. It's just stinging. Those are stinging words. Just after his sons had been killed, he says these words. This is God saying, you must treat as holy and sanctified me and my things in my house. I cannot abide foolishness. You can't get drunk and think that you're going to worship God in a way where your senses are dulled and your wits are not about you. This is serious business, and you have to pay very close attention, because I have given specific instructions, and you can't innovate. And if you get to drinking a little bit, there's a decent chance that you're going to overstep your bounds, overstep the bounds of propriety, and you will die. So, that's a challenging one. Now, was this part of the problem of why Nadab and Abihu were killed? It certainly could be. It certainly could be. It doesn't seem to me that God would say something like this unless it was a possibility that that was connected with what had gone wrong with Nadab and Abihu. So I think there's a good possibility that that is part of it. Now, what's interesting also, right in the middle of this section in Leviticus 10:16, it says that Moses diligently searched for the goat of the sin offering. Now, interesting thing here. There are an even number of words in the Torah. And right smack in the middle of the Torah is the book of Leviticus. And if you count up all the words and you've come to the middle two words in all of the Torah, the two middle words are darosh, darosh. They're spelled exactly the same way, but just pronounced slightly differently. And they are, and Moses searched diligently. Searched diligently. What does this mean, and why is this significant? I think it's significant in a couple of different ways. Number one, right, the words that are right in the middle of the Torah are search diligently. I think there's a spiritual principle that you can easily derive from that, which is that God expects the heart of his people to be willing and ready to search diligently in his word. And Moses was very concerned with how things were done, being very careful, trying to follow the instructions of God very carefully, and he searched diligently because he did not see what he thought he should have seen, which was Aaron and his sons were supposed to eat part of the goat that was offered for the sin of the people. However, they let it all be consumed with fire and they did not eat any of it. Now you might say, well, these guys did something different than was prescribed as well. Why didn't they die? That's a great question. And I think, as you can see on my title slide here, that this shows no innovation and yet grace abounds. These guys, Eleazar and Itamar, also did something different that was not the way it was supposed to be. But the reason was very different than what happened with Nadab and Abihu. I believe that what Aaron was saying here, he says, yes, I understand. When he replied to Moses, notice that Moses was angry with the sons of Aaron, Eleazar and Itamar. But Aaron is the one who answered. This is also instructive. I believe that what probably happened is that they were supposed to eat part of this goat. Their brothers had just died before their eyes. Their brothers and their son, Aaron's son, and their brothers died before their very eyes on a day that was supposed to be glorious and magnificent and wonderful. Didn't turn out that way. I think that their hearts sank. They were instructed, do not unbind your turbans or tear your clothes or do any act of contrition publicly right now or you will die. But that doesn't mean that their hearts weren't heavy and that their souls weren't crushed. But they were instructed by Aaron to not give any public display of grief because you're involved in a very specific ritual that is holy and has to be done correctly. And so they refrained from public demonstrations of grief, and yet their hearts were heavy. And they probably went to their father Aaron and they said, Dad, we don't have appetite. We're in a period of mourning here. Our brothers have just been struck dead, and our appetite is gone, and we can't eat. And so they searched diligently with their father to ask him, what should we do? Should we try to force down this food just because it's what we're supposed to do? And Aaron probably gave them permission and said, "No, I think that the right thing to do and that God would be okay with this is if we abstain, that we don't eat as we normally would. We're not going to make a public display. It's going to be in private, but we're going to refrain from eating." And I think that they looked at this principle of weighing the commands of the Torah and saying, what is the heavier commandment? That you not bring strange fire? Or that you not go into the holy place and offer incense of your own making, with fire of your own making, with a little bit of inebriation you got your buzz on? Or not eating a portion that you were supposed to eat? They weighed these things and they determined it's probably going to be okay. And they did. And when Moses heard this explanation, it was good in his eyes. It was good in his eyes. That's what's interesting also is that, would it have been good, would it have been acceptable to God when Aaron says this? This is the Hebrew word yatav. And this is first used in Genesis 4:7 of Cain. When Cain made an offering, and it was not accepted. And God said to him, "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" Yatab. It's interesting and instructive. So I think that Aaron and his sons diligently searched in their hearts and in the instructions and found, I think that we can do this and it's going to be okay. So, the principle of Darash, search diligently, is demonstrated here, and grace is given to Aaron and Eleazar and Itamar in their innovation, but not in the innovation of Nadab and Abihu. Very different circumstances, though. Now, what do we learn from this? We cannot innovate in our worship of God. And notice also that Aaron is acting as a covering of godly authority for his sons Eleazar and Itamar in their decision to not eat the goat of the sacrifice. They didn't make this decision on their own, more than likely. So that's, I think, something that we can learn is don't innovate in your worship of God. Don't come up with new and wonderful ways that you think are great to worship God in your own way. And have a covering of authority over you. That is coming from men of wisdom, men and women of wisdom in your fellowship, people that you know who would guide you on the right things to do in the right ways. Being under someone's authority. That is very, very uncommon and unpopular in America, especially. America is one of those places that it's not one of those places. It seems to be singularly like this, as opposed to just about every place on the planet. People who travel a lot, and frankly, I am not one of those people. People who travel a lot will tell you that America is very unique in this regard. To every man, the individual is elevated to almost worship status. There is very little collective, very little community, very little thought for what is good for others. That is one of the downfalls of our society and our culture, is the elevation of the individual, We do not like authority. This nation was founded on rebellion against the authority of the British. It was, very, very, very quickly we threw off the authority of the British. We had just a fiercely independent people. And that's a dangerous thing spiritually. So I would say, get yourself under such, to have some accountability and have people of wisdom above you that would guide you and help you and protect you from being foolish and making stupid decisions. The Psalms tell us that there is wisdom, or the Proverbs, that there is wisdom in many counselors, and to always seek the counsel of people who are wiser, older, more spiritual, more advanced than you. Multiple counselors, great wisdom there. So those are some of the things that I saw in this chapter. Now the last thing here is discerning between the clean and the unclean. And this is the chapter in Leviticus 11, which deals with that touchy subject of food. And I know that a vast majority of the world, and unfortunately our normal Christian brothers and sisters in the Christian church, do not abide by God's laws regarding what is food and what is not. And I don't want to detail for you what exactly all of these laws are. You can read them for yourself. They're fairly straightforward. You got this little section about land animals. You got a little section about sea animals. A little section about air critters and creepy crawlies. Anything that moves and breathes and lives on the planet, it will distinguish for you what is able to be eaten and what is not. And we frankly don't have any idea why God said, eat this and don't eat that. Because there are some puzzling things in there about why certain things are science could potentially tell us why, but not in all cases. There's not a universal principle here. Some people have said, well, there's science to demonstrate that this animal is unclean in the Bible, and therefore, and science says, yeah, that's definitely not it's a kind of an unclean creature, and it can make you sick. Okay, certainly possible, but it's not a universal. And I don't think that it is just because the things that he is telling you not to eat are unhealthy. I don't think that that's actually the case. I think it's because he has made decisions for us based on his own counsel, which we are not privy to exactly. We don't know exactly why he has said these things you shall eat and these things you shall not. It's not entirely clear. All we are to do is say, yes, we agree, because you said it. Not because we understand it, not because we agree with it, but because we are obedient. And I just want to point out for you in chapter 11, verse 45, just at the end of the section here, that he says, because I am Yehovah, your Elohim, I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God, and you are to be holy, because I am holy. This is the law of the land animals, the birds, and all the living creatures that move in the water, and all the creatures that swarm on the land, so that you will distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the living creatures that may be eaten and the living creatures that must not be eaten. This is a matter of holiness. And I know that we don't have in the Christian assemblies a very good understanding of this. We have been foolish in our understanding of some scriptures and mistranslated others and been led astray by our traditions in others, to where we think that some of the New Testament letters would throw the parts of the Torah out the window. But, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know that this is not the case. But there are some of you perhaps out there who are saying to yourselves, I just... I don't see it. I don't. My heart is not convicted in regards to eating clean and unclean stuff. And I would say that's a dangerous place to be in. to say my heart is not convicted. That your heart, the human heart is foolishness and full of all kinds of foolishness. And it is desperately wicked. It makes dumb decisions all the time. And you should be very careful when you read the Bible, and it'll tell you what to do, but you have to have an open heart. And you're saying I'm just not convicted in that regard is a dangerous statement. You might be saying, I just really I love pork chops and bacon, and shrimp is one of my favorite things, and I love seafood of all different kinds. Believe me, I get it. I understand that. But then what you're saying is that your stomach is your God, and that you can't control your appetite. I get it. And you don't ask me how it is that food can defile you and make you unclean. I don't know. I don't actually know. I just know that there's something there. I don't know what it is, but it affects one. It affects one spiritually. Let me give you an example. A young man and a young woman, if they decide that they're going to engage in sexual activity before they get married, and they are going along like the rest of the society, and people who are old fuddy-duddies of the traditionalist sort say, you guys should have gotten married before you had sex. And they say, that's such an old-fashioned concept, and what's the difference, it's just a piece of paper. They may have been raised in a Christian home but decided to go their own way, for example, and they say, well, it's just a piece of paper. I mean, God knows that we love each other. We're monogamous. We're not out there, sleeping around. We're in a serious, committed relationship, and we're having sex, but we are not under a covenant, and we think that that's not necessary. But then, for example, the Spirit of God moves upon them, and they understand that a covenant is a proper thing, and that they want to be obedient. Maybe they have a change of heart. Maybe they convert to Christianity, and they decide, the Bible does say that, we should probably get married. So they do. And they go through a marriage ceremony. They separate themselves physically for a time as they're preparing for the marriage to keep themselves pure. And then they go and they get married. And shortly thereafter, they say to you, we were wrong. I don't know why. Truly, it does seem like what did we do? We had a party? We had a priest or a rabbi or a pastor say some words over us? We repeated some words to each other? What's the deal? But I will tell you this, we do feel different. Things are different. We feel it, we sense it, we understand it. Something is different once we have gotten ourselves into this covenant. Something is different. I don't know what it is, but it's different. I think it's the same way with food. If you eat clean food, things that are defined as food, it's different. If you don't, it's different. I am not the kosher police. I'm not going to make up rules regarding what you should and shouldn't do. I'm not the enforcer of the rules. I simply read them. I explain them to you as best I can, and I hope that you'll do them. That's all I have for you. I hope that you are staying safe out there. And I want to just make a couple of final comments. Food is one of the bridges between the body and the soul. there are a couple of bridges between the body and the soul. Connectors, if you will. Food, air, and water. Remove any of them and the body and the soul separate. You die. Those are the three things that a human body must have in order to live. Food, air, and water. And you can spiritualize each of those three things in a way that's very interesting if you decide to try to look that up. Very interesting stuff. It's a connector between the body and the soul. And those connectors have to be purified. You can't drink poison water and expect to keep the body and the soul together. You can't eat poisoned food. You can't eat things that aren't food and expect to keep the body and the soul together. And the body and the soul together does not mean death physically necessarily. Poison air will definitely separate your body and your soul. But pure air, from a spiritual perspective, the spirit, I would say that body and soul coming closer together is instructive of and represents for us the spirit being able to rule over the body. I would say that would be the picture that you would want to look at. And that's what comes with maintaining your sanctification, is that your spirit can begin to rule over your body, which is the way it should be. And that food and water and oxygen, air, are those three bridges. And food is one of those important ones. And so you need to be careful about what you eat. Is God your God, or is your stomach your God? Don't worry about whether you feel convicted about it. Just do what God says, and you will understand it afterwards. That is safe. Do what God says, whether you understand it or not. Some of His commandments, I am convinced you cannot understand them until you do them. And even when you do understand them, it's not with a kind of demonstration of some logical, reasonable thing that you can explain in a Greek logic kind of way. It's just right. You just know that it's right. You can feel it in your spirit. Now, sanctification involves a couple of different levels in your life. Number one is sanctified time. Time becomes sanctified when you calculate your life according to 6 days of work and 7th is rest. That 7 times throughout the year there are holy days that you observe to Yehovah in reverence of Him and in remembrance of the things He's done and in respect to future things that He will do, all centered around the Messiah Yeshua. Time becomes sanctified in your life. Your food becomes sanctified in your life. Your sexuality becomes sanctified in your life. That human sexuality becomes different as all of these different areas of your life fall under the purview of God and His commandments. They become sanctified. And even your money becomes sanctified. That you work to serve others and not yourself. And that you give and are generous with what God has blessed you with. All things in your life should be sanctified. Your time, your food, your sexuality, your money, what you watch, what you listen to, all things is a journey. It's a journey, and it takes time and a purification process over time. But we should ever be moving towards sanctification in all aspects of our life. And that's what the book of Leviticus is primarily about. Holiness and sanctification. And it's critical. It's sometimes complex, and we don't understand it, yet we do it. And that's what it is. Next time, we'll be looking at the Torah portions Tazria and Metzorah, Leviticus 12 through 15, and I hope that you'll be with us then. May the Lord bless you and guard you out there in the world, keep you safe, and make you not afraid. Love one another and pray for one another. Blessings to you. In the name of our Messiah, Yeshua.